weight on it. The problem is not the budgetary provision itself, is how we spent the money. So yes, we have a budget of 3.6 trillion, but how is that going to impact us as a country in terms of development, in terms of influencing our way of life, and even the quality of life of every Kenyan in this country? Because budget is supposed to improve the quality of life. It's supposed to take us to another level as a country.
Okay, and I understand before you come in, Ojiwa, we have views of several Kenyans.
Yes, yes.
Let's have that.
Kutu-involve wakitengeneza budget. Wao wenyewe wali make decision na wanafaa kukuja kwetu kama sisi wakulima wa chini ndio waweze kutengeneza ile budget. Lakini si wao wanatengeneza budget alafu wanatuletea.
Okay, a good question, but I don't think to that extent. Because sheria inasema Wakenya wafanye nini? Wakuwe involved. Wahusishwe. Watoe maoni yao vile budget inatakana ifanywe, itengenezwe before prior to reading, si ndio? Lakini ukweli ni kwamba hata kufikia mwananchi, hata forums ni chache sana utapata zenye zinahusika ili kupata maoni ya wananchi ndio kufanya nini? Kuandaa bajeti.
Hata hiyo miaka ingine sisi unajua sasa hatujuangi wanaudia wapi budget. Unaona? Sasa vile waliuda hizo zingine, at least mahali wanaudia kama wana involve wananchi, pia wa involve wananchi. Kama hata siku zingine wa involve wananchi, waunde budget yenye ita-accommodate mwananchi wa kawaida.
Those are some of the views of Kenyans saying that they were not involved in the process. I don't know what you think about that, Ojiwa, but our viewers can get us on the SMS number 20374. Let's keep the conversation going. What do you make of the budget 2021-2022? Yes, Ojiwa.
Thank you for having me. I think it's an interesting time as a country, and looking at the budget, the expectations of Kenyans, knowing at the ravages that we have of the coronavirus now, and looking at the budget, I have been trying to look at the budget allocations, and some of the things that I was looking at and thinking or feeling that should be included were how we can move post the COVID-19, and I think those are the aspirations of Kenyans, looking at the huge budget that we have now. So yeah, it's an interesting time, and we'll see how the parliament breaks it down and discuss it, because now it's still just a proposal, a budget proposal, and in the flow of parliament we'll get to see the views of our representatives. Yeah. Okay,
and Ukur Yatani, the Treasury Cabinet Secretary, says that the debt is sustainable. But Kenya, what are your views?
In terms of the sustainability of the debt, I don't think we have sustainable debt levels. And I don't believe so, because if you look at borrowings, most of the borrowings, and as you've seen, the budget allocation is going to actually recurrent expenditure. This is to pay salaries for public servants. And you're looking at it that we have a budget with more than 2 trillion recurrent expenditure, and only 600 billion shillings going to capital expenditure. Our ordinary revenue, especially from taxes, has been put at 1.7 billion. So it's actually meaning that we are borrowing to fund our day-to-day expenses. That is very dangerous if even in the just normal thinking, ordinary thinking, meaning that you are borrowing to consume. And that's the most worst perceptions, or the worst position to be as a country, as an individual, as even a corporate, whereby you borrow to fund your day-to-day expenses, meaning that our recurrent expenditures are over and above our ordinary revenue. If we had sustainable debt levels, then it will mean that every debt that we are borrowing is going towards capital expenditure. So if we are raising debts of over a trillion shillings, because if you have ordinary revenue of 1.7 trillion, and then you are borrowing close to 1 trillion, then it means you are actually overboard. You have done an overshoot of what is expected of you.
And when the CS was presenting the budget,
Yeah.
He was not only presenting the allocations,
Yeah.
but also the measures of how we can get funding.
Yeah, yeah.
So do you think then we will manage to get the over 2 trillion?
In terms of raising the
Yes.
2 trillion.
Yes.
Of course, you know, he's saying that he's going to employ a lot of external debt financing. And you see, it's lucrative for any country to lend Kenya money, because at the interest rates that the countries are actually charging to the Kenyan government, if there's no doubt that he will actually get the financing either through the Eurobond or whatever external borrowing that he's going to get, because it is actually a very lucrative deal to lend the government, because you are assured of the repayment. So he's going to raise that, but at the detriment of the Kenyan's economy. Because for us, we will be able to bear the debt burden through adjusting of the taxes. And there's someone who drew a picture of the African market, the African continent, whereby you'll find that now the global players, the other continents, actually bleed Africa with interest rates. And these interest rates are accrued or earned from government lending, especially to the Kenyan government. So yes, you're going to raise the funds, no doubt about it, through external borrowing, but at what cost? And what are the use of the funds? If you're using the funds to fund the recurrent expenditure, you're just digging a deep trench and putting us there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we saw Kenyans raising concern.
Yeah.
The last time that the government borrowed from the IMF.
Yes.
But so what is the place of Kenyans? Is there a way, because they feel like they were not consulted, they feel left out. So then what?
I think the concerns of the Kenyans is, you know, when we borrow, we want to see the impact of the borrowing. So as my brother said, we are borrowing to finance expenditure. So we are not seeing, you know, when you borrow 2 billion, 5 billion, we want to see constructively what that money has been able to do. But our concern as Kenyans, because we are not seeing what that money is doing or changing as a country, that's why, you know, we keep making, raising concerns now and then.
And unemployment, job losses, especially to the young people. With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, very many people lost their jobs. And now there is a promise of kazi kwa vijana, kazi mtaani.
I think as a country, we need to have a priority. I think this was the time that as a country would sit down and look at our priorities. There are so many young people that have lost their jobs, and our priority would have been rebuilding the country first. Looking at the businesses that were lost. If you look at developed countries, there was a budget set aside to cushion, to rebuild some of the lost or the collapsing businesses. We are looking at kazi mtaani. There are many young people that cannot fit into that bracket of kazi mtaani, because if you look at, you know, the underlining approach of kazi mtaani, most of young people are cleaning the roads. Not me and you are doing businesses would get to that level of cleaning the road or you know, opening the trenches. So the government would have come up with a plan. Yes, we have the kazi mtaani, but let's have levels of kazi mtaani. There are people who are doing businesses that, you know, that there could be a fund to support.
So you feel like maybe it does not include all the youth.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think
the NYS and the kazi.
Yes.
And just to mention, Nancy, I think one of the biggest, especially my personal opinion, kazi kwa vijana or kazi mtaani is one of the most useless piece of legislation we have with this government. Does it mean that we have reduced ourselves to just slashing the road? And you can look at how much money is being allocated to the infrastructure project. Most of that money, looking at 0.6 billion, is actually going to foreigners. Now we are saying we are allocating some small money to just give people to slash the road. And some of these young people who are actually being paid to slash the road, they're being paid some very meager payment that cannot be sustainable. And how the slashing the road contribute to the GDP of a country? So I believe it is a fallacy. It is something that cannot sustain any country. And what we need to do, what I would propose even for the government to do is, if you want actually to create an employment for the youth, in fact, you just first identify those young people who are endowed with actually academic intelligence and sponsor them to foreigner universities whereby you can unlock their potential to engage them in infrastructure projects. Because we're using a lot of money to pay the Chinese to do our roads. For how long? For 100 years from today, if we don't make a turnaround strategy, we're going to be paying Chinese to build our roads, and our young people will only remain slashing. Does it mean that we are so incompetent that we cannot even do cabros on the Kenyan roads? That we cannot even be engaged in the construction of the sewerage system and the drainage system? And this is where most of the government budget is going, and it's actually capital flight because it's being paid to foreign companies, and these foreign companies employ Kenyans on meager payments to do the manual job, but the huge part of it goes away. And that's the biggest challenge. If we had a strategy to unlock young people's potential, is to actually identify them and sponsor them for more growth and development of their capacities, and give them jobs that are more decent, which currently we are exporting to foreigners through foreigner companies that were giving the tenders.
So the young people are still left out where it really matters.
Of course. We are saying you can just slash the road, you can clean, you can be just wiping, and it's not sustainable because it is not even something that is even there for the long time. Okay. And yet also we are killing, there is no strategic investment into the manufacturing industry. For instance, I will propose, if we wanted really to unlock the young people's potential, that money, instead of giving it, and actually it's another loophole for whereby corruption, the money is corrupted into some of the officials in form of sharing the money. You could say that money, let's give it to a private investor to do a manufacturing company who will employ this number of young Kenyans to work in the factories, and these products are going to be exported and bring foreign revenue into our country. So the Kazi kwa Vijana is one of a very useless piece of legislation that is going actually to impoverish people than increase the economic well-being.
And let's talk about the Big Four agenda, which remains a priority. Some people have already argued that it is the president's legacy, so it has to be factored in before he leaves office come 2022. What do you make of it, Ojiro?
I think the timelines, the Big Four agenda was a good, agenda for the president. But looking at the timeline now, we are 14 or so months away to the next election or to the next government. So I think as a country right now, I mentioned about the priorities. If you look at the Big Four agendas and what we are at now, the Big Four agenda are not a priority now, because we've been talking about the job losses, we've been talking about the teachers' employment. There are so many sectors, subsectors that are dying now that we should look into supporting rather than looking at the Big Four agendas, looking at the timeline that we have to the next government. Yeah.
Okay, and I quote CS Yatani. He says, I propose to amend the income tax to act to allow the contribution to NHIF qualify for tax relief at the rate of 15% of the contributed amount. So what are your views on that, Roland?
That one is a welcome move to make NHIF a tax relief, the contribution to NHIF. But the challenge is those are just sweeteners. It has no impact, because what is the contribution to NHIF? For me, I contribute 1,700 shillings to NHIF. 15% of that is hardly 300 shillings. So, you're giving me a tax relief of 300 shillings. But again, probably I'm on the higher tax bracket, especially when it comes to NHIF. But there are people,
who pay actually lower
500
than that,
shillings.
yes, a month.
So, but you're only doing 15%. You're only giving them a tax relief to the extent of 15%. So, meaning if you're doing 500 shillings, you're looking at almost that is 15 shillings times 5. You know, that's 45 shillings. Actually, it's very little. It's very little, by the way, in terms of the impact that is going to create.
So you feel like it's still very negligible? It's
a very negligible tax relief. It is not strategic. It is going to have a very little impact. Yes, it's a welcome move because most often when you contribute to NHIF, it's not considered for tax purposes. But I will actually suggest you will have done 100% contribution to NHIF is actually tax deductible rather than just limiting it to 15%. And then the other issues that I'm hoping that, and because I've heard some of the politicians talk about it, the need to adjust NHIF rates higher to unlock revenue. The first thing is we need to streamline the NHIF. And I know people are actually really talking about it, increasing the NHIF contributions so that can offer even capital for the capital projects. But then now it's a very big risk because still we are paying a lot in terms of the income tax. So I would have expected the CS to do 100% contribution to NHIF gives you a tax relief. And then I'm hoping that they're not going to increase the amount of contribution to NHIF by bringing that amendment. And then number 3, I'm hoping that NHIF will be streamlined and become effective because currently you go to hospital, you're contributing a certain amount of NHIF. You can only claim bed and a limit of a very small amount, which actually it's not a very practical insurance. It's a raw deal to Kenyans, yeah.
And the COVID-19, we know that from last year, so it's been over a year and a half actually of the pandemic. Yeah. And so 15.3 billion allocated to COVID-19. What do you make of that, Ukur?
I think, and I've mentioned here that, you know, we are in the middle of a pandemic. Right now we are talking about, you know, the vaccinations and how to even help the economy to grow. So that would have been the priority when we were looking at the budget. So I think it's not a significant amount, knowing where we are right now as an economy and looking at sectors that are now dying and having not figured in the vaccination. Many of our Kenyans have not been vaccinated. In the next 6 or so months, there'll be less that you can do when you're not vaccinated. So I think that would have been a priority for us as a country.
15.3 billion, Ronald.
Yeah, for the COVID-19 vaccination. Yes. Yeah, that is a good provision because COVID-19 is quite a priority. Vaccination of people is critical in terms of enhancing people return to work. But I will hope that most of those, because 6 billion is merely for the vaccination and the rest are for COVID-19 related prevention measures, I'm hoping that most of that money is used locally to unlock rather than importing most of the issue, the things, irrespective of how it's being used. But most importantly is to ensure that we try to minimize on imports so that we can be able to unlock the potential in the local business community.
Okay, and the NMS, Nairobi Metropolitan Services, 100 million set aside for the NMS improvement project and 101 million shillings for construction of footbridges. So the NMS funding, do we feel the NMS is doing enough so they will do more with the allocation of 100 million? Yes, I'll start with you, Ronald.
The NMS, the NMS is doing a good job, but my personal feeling is that we have given a lot of attention to Nairobi. And sometimes I always tend to think that there is no much of investment that will make Nairobi a more ideal place if we don't look at the environments, the Nairobi environments. Because why have we concentrated all government offices in the CBD? And we are investing so much to decongest the traffic. We're investing so much to just reduce the traffic in the CBD and ease out things, even investing in sewerage, in footbridges and all that. I will tend to think that that money could be used to improve the other counties like Kajiado increase Kiambu, increase, and also try to decentralize government services so that we actually expand Nairobi than trying to just recreate this city and then try to invest so much in it that might not really be recoverable. And even as we continue to invest, we are going to increase the rural-urban migration. We're going to increase a lot of attraction at the center and put pressure on the resources within Nairobi. So the investment for NMS is good, is a welcome move. But can we also look just out of Nairobi, especially the environments, Kiambu, Kajiado, Machakos, and try to decentralize government services so that we ease pressure at the center.
Okay, and before I read the comments, maybe about the footbridges, Ojiwa, the rate of accidents, they will probably reduce because there's a lot of accidents on Mombasa Road, on the major highways.
I think, I think the population that we have in Nairobi now, it's not something that had been projected before. And I support Ronald's opinion and idea of, decentralizing Nairobi so that more other services could be offered in Kajiado and other counties. So we are getting into that because of the planning. So, and we welcome what is happening in, with the Nairobi Metropolitan, the understanding the need now and trying to fix the need now, which is something that had not been projected before. So having the footpaths around the city, because if you look at around Nairobi, most Kenyans, walk to work. And if we can encourage that by having proper footpaths around the city, the better. It's a good way of decongesting, the traffic along the major roads.
Okay.
Yeah, because you go, just to add on it, you go to a place like Kajiado, there is huge, massive land, empty, and yet you go to Kibera, there's a lot of congestion. You go to Madhari, there's a lot of congestion. Why could we create industries in Kajiado? Why could we even remove our parliament and take them to Machakos and decentralize, maybe leave Nairobi to be merely a commercial city?
So then we'd stop spending so much in Nairobi and develop other areas.
And also just to help other neighboring counties within Nairobi to sprout up, because the concept is to centralize services, but look at it, the difference between Kajiado and Nairobi is not much. You can be in Nairobi, you drive to Kajiado to get one thing, go to Machakos to get another. It will not be a very bad thing, especially with the bypasses coming up. Then we need to capitalize on that and decentralize the CBD.
Okay,
yeah.
So I will go straight to the comments. Fiona Kenga says, great analysis of the post-budget 2021-2022. Thank you, my colleague Fiona Kenga. Felix Maringa says, in 2016, the EACC chairman, Philip Kinisu, mentioned, I'll get back to it again. In 2016, the EACC chairman, Philip Kinisu, mentioned that a third of Kenya's annual budget goes into corruption. Why do we need to borrow more money if that same money will be lost to corruption? What do you make of that, Ojiwa? If you're borrowing money and it ends up in the hands of a few people.
And that's why Kenyans are complaining. If the services were good, we wouldn't mind government borrowing. But knowing that, whatever is borrowed, it's not going to directly support what is intended for. That is why we complain. And it's because we've seen, the president said we are losing 2 billion every day. And telling that to Kenyans who are helpless and have their hopes on the president, discourages. That's why we discourage the borrowing by the government.
Yes, Ronald.
Yeah, in terms of the fraudulent activities within the government ministries, and that is actually our way we have been wired to put a lot of emphasis on the projections and not a lot of emphasis on the actual expenditure. I'm an auditor by profession. Most often, when you present accounts at the AGM, you will never, at annual general meeting of a corporation, you can never discuss the budget before you discuss the actuals. So we are putting a lot of emphasis on projections, and we are not putting a lot of emphasis on the actuals. So as a country, as a parliament, if we will first discuss the actuals versus and the variances, this is what we approved last year, this was the actual expenditure, then now let's look at the budget. And if you actually start discussing the actuals, then they will be actually trying to look at the loopholes within our expenditure system. And the institutions that have been actually structured to ensure that there is good accountability is the Auditor General, is the EACC, and we have the Director of Public Prosecution. What happens to their report? They are never given a lot of attention. You will see Auditor General giving a lot of reports, qualified, adverse opinion. In my own understanding, and also that those are a very, very critical reports that need to be given an emphasis, because why did some of the counties get adverse report? Why are they getting disclaimer reports? We are not giving those reports the same weight we are giving the budget. So meaning we are not evaluating what has happened. If we do that as a country and hold the people who actually misuse our money accountable, then it makes sense for us to really talk about our budget, because then we are projecting now something that will really happen. And you look at those monies that go to various ministries, they are all squandered. You will need to look at, even audit our recurrent expenditure, especially to our wage bill, our salaries. Are they actuals? Are we paying ghost workers? And then there's something we call value for money auditing. If there's money that was used to build the express highway, how much was it? Did we get value for money in actually building the express highway? And you know, based on the budgeted and the actuals, what were the variances? And have we, and you know, the Auditor General is supposed to give us that report. And just before we talk about the budget, let's table that, really punch holes in it, and then let's talk about the budget.
So we might be living in the theory world,
yeah,
not being very practical.
Of course, yeah. We actually giving a lot of emphasis on provisions, but not actuals. So in fact, even now we could have been discussing more about what the government projected and how it spent, and holding them accountable, and see what holes, where did they go
then
wrong.
Then
from there now say, based on that, now we are fixing the budget for the next period. So in terms of amending our fiscal policies, but at the same time as a country, giving focus in more preventive measures rather than on just complaining.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
And infrastructure, it has been allocated 200 billion.
Yeah.
And you know that there are different projects ongoing in the country.
Yeah.
We have the Mombasa Road Westlands Expressway,
yeah,
just to name a few, among others.
Yeah, yeah.
So do you feel like infrastructure is the one place that we should totally invest in?
I think the government has really invested in infrastructure. I hope that would have been one of the top 4 agenda items, because I think it's also a way of, you know, opening up a country, opening up opportunities. I've seen the SGR, so there's a lot of emphasis on development, especially infrastructure. The LAPSET also, yeah. So yeah.
Yes, Ronald.
Yeah, infrastructure is good because one, and I had the CS say that the reason for investing in infrastructure is to unlock future capital. Because you know, Kenya competes with other African countries in terms of foreign direct investment. So infrastructure is a key driver for foreign direct investments. But the challenge, as I said earlier, that is we are not able to run our own infrastructural projects. We have outsourced most of these infrastructural cost projects at a very high price. We still borrow to actually finance this infrastructure, and we are not building local capacity for future infrastructural projects, because we are a developing country. We're going to be in infrastructure projects for the longer time. So are we building local capacity to build our own infrastructure projects, or we are still highly dependent on foreigners to build our infrastructure? And then there we will never be in, we will never correct our balance of payment. We will still actually find that we are paying so much outside than we are receiving, because our exports from agriculture cannot sustain that.
Okay, and as we wind up, I'd just like to pick your mind. This is the last budget being read when Uhuru is in office. So do we feel like it is his time now to ensure that the different projects that he's started, just building on to his legacy? Yes, Ojiwa.
Yeah, I think it's now that, and it's unfortunate that it's the last time, and we're also having a pandemic. But I think he's going to use this to build on his legacy, because all the Kenyans are watching, and I believe that is why there's so much emphasis on infrastructure, so that he can say, this is what I did when I was the president.
Okay, yes, Ronald, very briefly.
Okay, in terms of Uhuru and the infrastructure projects, yes, it's done infrastructure project. But as a leader, that is not the biggest expectation from you. I always say there are two roles of a leader. There is stroke of the pen roles, and there is what we call behavioral change role. So yes, you've built roads, you've built hospitals, but you just took people's money and did that. We want to see some behavioral change, leadership attributes from him, whereby he's changing the way people steal public money. If we're able to reduce the level of corruptions in the country, that's what we're going to judge him as his legacy. Even if he leaves us roads and he doesn't leave us very strong institutions, accountability, and then he will not have really scored very highly. I always say that the Kibaki regime, yes, they build roads, but over and above that, they actually caused significant behavioral change, our mindset change.
The attitude.
The attitude, the way we pay our taxes, and you remember that was the time we had a very big jump into our revenue collections, in terms of corruption, in terms of even our culture of hard work. Kibaki government restored that. And we are looking at what behavioral changes that have been brought by this government. I believe up to now very little. I'm seeing very little. If that can be done in the remaining period, and then that we can be able to credit. But infrastructure, a very small score on that.
Okay, and I will go back to the comments.
Yeah.
Joy Timochache says, does the budget serve the needs of the common Mwananchi? If so, what has changed between this and last year's budget? We have been breaking it down for you, Joy Mochache. And Mumbi Nyokabe says, the suggestion on various jobs within the Kazi Mtaani program is really great. A lot of youth out here have talents and skills they could put to use. Quite different from what you gentlemen were saying. But that is where we conclude our conversation. Thank you so much, Ronald Bosi, the CEO of Ronald's East Africa. And of course, Ojiwa, who is a youth leader community guy. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation, helping us to break down to the common Mwananchi what the budget is really about. Yeah, I am Nancy Lima. Thank you so much for watching Trending News, and keep it Look Up TV.